or morning, wherever you are. Once again, we're very happy to have many people joining us. There are people from all over the country and Canada. There are single owners. We have some consultants. We have some acquirers of large national groups. So really great group of people here. And I appreciate your being here. My absolute favorite thing to talk about. How do people either buy or sell schools? We do both. You may hear me use terminology interchangeably, whether I'm talking about a buyer or a seller. Same process, no matter what side of the table you're on, the same things are important. It's really not a win-lose situation. It always has to be a win-win. So what's good for the buyer is good for the seller, and to do it successfully, everyone has to come out doing well at the end of the transaction. So please also, a little housekeeping, you should have a panel bar over to the right of your screen. So you should have 3 things on your screen. You should have the PowerPoint presentation, which at the moment shows our title page, Growing Your Company by Acquisition. You should have me, and you should have a panel bar. Okay. Looks like you may not have access to me. Give me 2 seconds for a media break.
Okay. So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Got me? Yeah. Okay. There we are. Okay. So now you should have 3 screens. You should have the title page to the PowerPoint presentation. You should have me, and you should have a panel bar over to the right, which looks complicated, but really pretty simple. As we go through the process, I would encourage people to ask questions. You'll note that there's a tab that says questions. Just click on that and type in whatever you want. We certainly won't call it out, so you'll, I did have that question from a few people. We don't share information about who's on our webinar. We certainly won't share who you are when you ask a question. Ask anything you want. I have Reagan and Lauren monitoring questions, and we'll shoot those over to me as we go, because I want to be sure that things are clear as we go. Probably about 30 to 40 minutes of content, and then we'll answer whatever questions you have at the end. So thank you for participating. We always get a lot of our great ideas from participants, so please do that. Okay, so lots going on in, first of all, before I go there, the buying and selling process is pretty complicated in any type of transaction, whether it's business or real estate. There are a lot of details. What I'm going to share mainly are the things that are very important to know in our industry, because there are some industry-specific things that you should do and should not do that will create a successful transaction. But this is intended to be a very high-level look at the process and the steps that you go through, and the terminology, so that when you get into the process, you will at least recognize that. But it's certainly not intended to be all of the detail, because, again, it can be very complicated, and the people that you work with that help you will be very important to you in the process. So let's get started here. And first thing I always like to talk about, here we go. All right, so the first thing I like to talk about is what we're going to talk about, to be sure that you understand that and that meets your needs here for buying and selling. I always like to start with what's going on in the world. So that's the first objective. We talk to a lot of people every day. It's all we do. We've been in the acquisition and divestiture or buying and selling game in this company for 13 years. I've personally done it for 29 years, so lots of change and lots of things going on, and all we do all day is talk to people on the phone about what they're doing. So we hear a lot. We love to share that. I like to talk a little bit about if you're a buyer, the things that we hear and challenges people have when they want to grow. You know, there's a big transition from one school to two schools, actually, and then many more along the way. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I'd like to talk about the procedures that you go through for a transition, just what are the steps that have to happen to buy or sell. We want to talk a little bit, but very broadly, about how to value. We did a webinar last time, which was in April, which is available on our website. You can go back and watch that or download it on specifically how you value a business in real estate. That's a complete animal in itself, but we'll at least hit the terminology and the steps to go through. And then a little bit about how you use real estate for growth. We're actually, that's a complicated part of the process, and we're considering our next webinar on real estate processes and how you can use it to grow and how it's valued. If that's interesting to you, please give us some feedback. The next webinar will be on September 17th, which I think yeah, so technically should be August. I think we're jumping to September because I know what your life is like in August, and if probably a 1-hour webinar would not make sense for you. So that's where we're going for this hour. Okay, first of all, the current market. All I can say about it is in my 29 years of buying and selling, I have never seen so much investment money chasing our industry. So it's an exciting time for people. I guess I would say it's a better time to be on the selling end than the buying end because there's a good bit of competition for high quality product that's out there. But the numbers that people are paying for both businesses and real estate right now are at a high that I've not seen in 29 years. And that's for a couple of reasons. The industry has been very stable economically through the downturn, and there were some very successful transactions, a couple of years, large transactions in the industry that got the notice of big money investors, and that trickles down to everyone. So there is a lot of activity and a lot of energy, and it's not just for businesses, it includes real estate as well, and a lot of creativity around that too. So people are structuring transactions in a way that include things like minority investments in companies. They may or may not include real estate. It could include growth capital for the future. So a lot of things going on in the industry that we didn't see even 6 months ago. So it's a continual, you know, for us it's a day by day who's doing what, and, you know, who can we help meet their objectives and how, and, you know, are there new vehicles out there in the industry to help them. So just a really exciting time that makes me happy for our clients. Okay, so first of all, most of these are self-explanatory, but I like to point them out real quickly. If you are considering buying, you have a single school, it's a tough transition for a lot of people from 1 to 2 schools, and maybe even beyond that if you have more than one school but they're closely aligned geographically and you can really know everything that's going on in your schools, then, you know, it may be past 1 before you feel some of the pains of growth, but what are the advantages of growth, which, you know, in my opinion, greatly outweigh the disadvantages? One thing is that as you get bigger, you can afford more things for your staff, and typically those things are employee benefits, which are really, really tough, as you know, for smaller companies to do things that are special for your staff, be able to afford the things you need to support them. As you grow bigger, that gets easier because you have more resources. The second thing and more important thing to me is growth opportunities for staff. If you have some very energetic, driven, strong people, they will want to continue to get growth opportunities. They want to be able to move up. If they're a teacher, they want to be an assistant director. If they're an assistant, they want to be a director. They want to eventually become a regional. So you know, to provide opportunities for them and let them know they can grow with a company is really important. A lot of times companies will lose valuable people to larger companies that can give them more opportunities. Another thing is the specialization of staff. As you grow, you know, one person, especially you, doesn't have to be and know everything. So you're at that point able to pull in more people to support the group that might have a certain specialty. I like to use the marketing one. Marketing is very industry specific and social media oriented now, and very different than it was 10 or 15 years ago, and maybe that's a position you need instead of combining that with the everything person that also runs payroll and does everything else in your company. So as you grow, you're able to hire people who can specialize in different areas. Fluctuations in individual sites. You know, if I had the answer to all of the sites being profitable at the same time, I would, you know, be doing really well right now. But if you do have one school that's off for a year or two for some reason, maybe you lose a director, there's a new competitor that came in. If you have more than one site, that helps to flatten out the financial situation for all. Economies of scale, just purchasing power. The bigger you get, the cheaper some things get. And these, you know, for us are mainly food and supplies and things that you can negotiate contracts for. And then a big one, exit strategy. So it's almost as much work to purchase one school, to purchase 10 schools as one school. Little bit more work, but not all that much. So most people who are interested in acquiring would much rather acquire a group, a small group, than a single or two schools. So as you grow, it definitely, if you're looking to exit by selling one day, definitely expands your opportunities there. And if you're a buyer, again, maybe a little more scary to consider purchasing more than one school, but it's just as much work and can really be more profitable if you do. So those are the good things, and of course I'm a fan of acquisition. The challenge is, you know, this is what I hear from people, two things. One thing is most people grew their company beginning with one school, and they did that successfully because they were in charge of everything and they could know everything that was going on and really be in control. So to let go of control, it's really tough for entrepreneurs. Less contact with the things that they got into business for, which are children and families. So, you know, as you grow, you really know less and less and have less direct contact with children and families, and more contact with the people who have the contact. So you become more of a upper level manager, and that's hard for some people. So just to think about. Okay, so let's talk about the process. Let's say that you have decided to buy or you've decided to sell. There are things that you need to do a good bit in advance, and we prefer to begin working with people more than a year in advance on either side of the, you know, whether they're a buyer or a seller, to get them prepared, because it can make a tremendous amount of difference in how well the process goes and the valuation if certain processes can be put in place 6 to 12 months ahead of time. So first of all, you need a team. So like we mentioned before, it's complicated. Transactions are difficult to work through, and you need a team of professionals to help you. Obviously, I'm a big fan of a broker, and even more specifically, a broker that knows our industry and is able to draw on relationships from the industry and know the nuances of what you should and shouldn't do. Really interview those people, though. There are people who have done educational transactions. There are people like us that only do them. Talk to as many people as possible. It's an important decision. You're trusting this person or this company with something that you've built. It's your baby. We hear that all the time, and it's important for you to have a relationship with that group of people that you feel comfortable with. Some things to look out for there are how long is the term of the contract. It should be, in our opinion, pretty short term. If someone can't bring you a viable solution in 6 months or so, you should be able to choose some other means of getting what you want done. You can always, at 6 months, if you're making progress and want to extend, you can always do that. But look out for that. Some brokers will charge you to value your company. We don't do that. We provide that as a service for people. As a matter of fact, we do that whether they're considering selling or not. We have a lot of people that we continue to update their valuation quarterly or annually, and we let them know what's going on in the industry, and we make suggestions about how they can strengthen the value of their company. So all important things. One other thing to look out for there is if there's a tail on the agreement. In other words, if your agreement has expired, do they still get paid for a certain amount of time if a transaction closes? So typically you'll see that if they brought someone for your consideration and the contract has expired, there's usually about 12 months that if a transaction closes, they still get paid. Look out for things like years, and look out for things like if you close on anything, even if they didn't bring that opportunity to you. So some things to look out for there. You should probably already have on your team an accountant and an attorney. They're very important as well. An accountant will know your personal situation and will be able to advise you on how a transaction will affect you personally. An attorney needs to be available to review documents, in some cases develop documents. It depends on who you're working with, whether they need to put together leases or purchase and sale agreements, or whether those will be provided by another party and they just need to review. One of the things I tell people to look out for with all three of these advisors is to remember through the whole process that there's only one decision maker on your side of the process, and it's you. It's not your broker, accountant, or attorney. They are advisors and not decision makers. Take their advice, make your own decision, remind them of that if you need to, and be sure that they understand that you want their advice on how to get something done and to move forward with it in a positive way. So 3 very important decisions there. Should be done well in advance. The second thing is to develop your company team. Typically, it takes a team of people to work through a process. And you'll see as we start to talk about the transition that it's not a one-man show. Then you need to, if you're on the buy side, you need to include some of your key team members in the way the transition happens. They need to help with the planning. They need to know what's going on. They need to be included in confidentiality, of course, and maybe you continually remind them of that, but the team needs to be involved. Same thing on the other side. You know, if you're considering selling, there's a trade-off on when you tell people, so confidentiality is vital, but it takes a team to do it, so you start to get your team ready for it. One other thing I like to say to people is that one good way to get the team ready is that even if you know you're not ready to buy or sell yet, you're just not considering it, probably opportunities have come your way. Someone's asked, would you like to look at this? Would you consider selling? I usually say to people, even if you know you're not ready, go through the process. Just say, you know, really wasn't thinking about it, but sure, I'll take a look, or sure I'll listen, because every time you go through that process, you get stronger, you understand it better, you start to know what's out there in the marketplace, and as you share that with your team, you train your team to get ready, because you really have to be ready for growth or divestiture before you need to be ready. So you have to do these things way in advance. So look at everything. Be ready for action means that if you know you want to grow or you know you want to sell, timing is really important, and a lot of times you don't get to choose the timing. A lot of times we'll have a great opportunity and there just happens to be a timing issue with the particular buyers that would be great have some internal things going on, they're refinancing, or they just can't pull it off right now. And sometimes if you want to buy, you just can't find the right thing. So you have to be opportunistic and ready to move really, really quickly when opportunities come up. So you have to, put your processes in place, and when those opportunities present themselves, be ready to move. Financially fit means that you're ready on both sides. So if you want to buy, you have a source of capital, you at least have some ideas and contacts about how you would go raising that capital, or you have cash sitting around waiting to do it. If you're going to sell, then your financial picture needs to be the best that it can be. We'll talk about that with valuation in just a minute. Your information also needs to be very up to date. So if you are looking at something or selling something, most people want to see not just the most recent year. So at this point in the year, not 2014 information, they would want to see what's called a rolling 12 financial statement. And what that means is the most recent 12 months. So if we're in June today, most people would have closed their books at the end of May of 15. They would want to see June the 1st of 14 through May the 31st of 15. In other words, just the most recent 12 months. And the reason for that is that the world is changing so quickly that 2014's stale by this point. So you really need very up-to-date information. So be sure that your process for financial information is up-to-date and ready to go. And then operationally independent and congruent means that your company can, so I tell people your job as a manager is to work your way out of a job. Same thing with a parent. Your job is to teach your children how to survive without you. So as you grow your team and they're ready to fly on their own, you become more attractive to buyers and you become more ready to buy. So growing your team and having them ready to take over things when you need to focus on something else like a purchase or a sale is where you're headed with your team. Okay, so let's talk about the process that we go through. Okay, so we mentioned confidentiality. This is a critical part of the process in our industry, I think more so than a lot of industries. First of all, directors and teachers are the smartest people I have ever seen about noticing when something's different, and confidentiality is just critical in the way that you manage a process. So you only want people to know when you want them to know, and you control the information and you present it in the way that you want to. And if done correctly, confidentiality breaches are rare. I'll talk in a minute about when they usually happen, but we don't have many, and that's good news. So to secure that, you always want a confidentiality agreement between parties when they're looking at each other's information, sometimes called an NDA or a non-disclosure agreement, same thing. You may hear both terms used, and basically says that each party can use the information to consider the opportunity. They can share it with internal staff and advisors. So advisors could include your broker, your accountant, your attorney, any professional that would advise you on that transaction. But this is a very important piece of the process and should be done way before. It should be done between you and your broker before you get any information, give any information. So when we initially work with people, we sign confidentiality between our company and them. It's in the same form that we might eventually require of anyone, so they get used to what it looks like and understand how it protects them and gets them ready for the process. But be sure that, again, you see confidentiality agreements and you know they're being executed. The second thing in a process, and typically this would happen through a broker, you would identify either people to buy or people who would consider your company. Be very involved in that process. Know who know who is being told about your plans to purchase or sell. It surprises me a lot of times that people have their companies listed and they have no idea who it's being shopped to. That should never happen. You should have a complete list. You should know exactly who is signing confidentiality. You should get a copy of it. You should countersign it and keep a copy of that. So be sure you're involved in that very important part of the process. The next thing that would happen is that once confidentiality is signed and it's agreed that these are the people we'll talk to, typically a very short list of information is gathered initially. So we call it initial due diligence. And it's very basic pieces that you would be able to make a pretty good decision on. So those for us are things like, and this is not a comprehensive list because there are about 20 items on the list. We want most recent financial statements. We want to know some information about the company's capacity and tuition rates and staffing patterns and information about how the owners operate so that we can come up with a valuation. So it's a very short list, but it's a list that gets us very close, or it gets us a valuation, so it gets very close to knowing that the numbers are correct and would work in the situation. So that information is produced. You move to a valuation process where, again, either your company is being valued or the company you're considering is being valued, and you need to understand that. So someone needs to be able to run those numbers for you, explain to you how they derive the valuation, and make a decision with you that feels comfortable and meets your needs. Exactly what you need it to do right now. Maybe you need to spend some time and work on numbers a little bit. Maybe the target you're going after doesn't have exactly the financial situation you want, but it's important for you. This is the most important part. You need to know if you're buying that you're going to be able to make the money you want to from this investment later, and you need to know if you're selling that this meets your long-term objective. So very important part of the process, and very specifically done in our industry, and there's certain benchmarks that people look for. So this is where your broker with industry knowledge will also come in. Once that's done and there are some potential prospects out there, people will look and talk to you and ask you more questions. They may want to do a site visit before a letter of intent. What I would say about a site visit is to be extra cautious again about confidentiality. So most of the review of information, or all of the review, is done off-site. Be very protective about people coming to your site. As a broker, we only tour schools once. If there are people who are looking at that school later, we conduct the meeting and lead the process, but off-site, so the on-site tour would be done without us. If we come through twice, again, directors and teachers are very smart, and they get that, and they may become concerned about why we're there again. So when people tour, we let our sellers determine how they will present that to their staff. And every school is different, so, and that person knows their people better than anyone else. Some things that work really well, though, are they can be bankers. Bankers and insurance agents are popular choices. Those can be male or female without getting a lot of attention. You can have multiple people come through if you say, we're shopping our banking relationship over the next month. We may have 3 or 4 people come through and take a look at the school. Be sure that these tours are limited to, it shouldn't take really any more than 15 or 20 minutes. You can meet off-site and answer questions. People who tour are very good, not doing or saying anything that would cause concern. So be very protective over that. I've also been a person who's developing a new website for the company, and that was handy because I could take some photos. So there's some creative ways to do it. There are other suggestions, but those are some good ones to consider. The next thing that would happen is that you would either give or receive a letter of intent, commonly called an LOI, sometimes called an IOI. But the letter of intent is a non-binding expression of interest. And the reason that it's non-binding is that puts in motion the process of the attorneys developing legal agreements. So people don't really want to go to that step unless they know that some basic things are agreed to already. Even though it's non-binding, it usually takes the opportunity off the table for a certain amount of time so that those agreements can be developed 30 to 60 days. What you don't want is someone continuing to shop their company while you're paying your attorney to do the agreement. So in the letter of intent are very basic things. They're usually a couple of pages. They would outline the most important thing that, you know, the toughest to get to is price. So no surprise there. The other things are, what are the terms of that price? Are you going to pay all cash? Are you asking them to finance part of it? Are you being asked to finance part of it? What does it include? Does it include the real estate? Or are they going to lease the real estate and just buy the business? Does it include all of your furnishings? Are vehicles included? If they are and there's debt on them, is the debt intended to be paid off, or will they absorb that debt? Does it include computers? I try to tell people if they're personal items that they have in the school, no matter what they are, and that's okay. It's usually, you know, people understand they're personal items, but just go ahead and exclude them up front so that it's not a surprise. You might have a antique desk you want to keep. You may have some prints in the school that you want to be sure you keep, a personal vehicle, those kinds of things. And also, when will it close? You don't want this just to be open forever. There's no reason to drag it out forever. That starts to breach confidentiality. So those things should be outlined in your letter of intent. What that sets in motion is the development of definitive legal agreements, which are, if there's a business purchase and a real estate purchase, it's an asset purchase agreement which outlines the terms of the business purchase or sale, and a lease. If it's both, then you might just get one agreement for both to purchase. Once those are done, then you move to a final due diligence list, and this is really intended to verify the information that's already been given, and mainly an evaluation. So they would or you would ask for specific information that would verify the numbers given. And this is certainly not an all-inclusive list. We get list requests anywhere from 1 to 15 pages. They can be quite extensive. You might want to see bank statements to verify revenue. You'll want to see some payroll reports to verify payroll. You'll want to collect information that will allow for a smooth transition, like payroll documents, so that you're ready to go with that when it's time to process payroll. It's quite a list, but there, is a lot to do with transitioning a business. So that's another group of information to collect. So real quickly, because again, I do an hour and a half workshop just on how to value a business. So I'm going to hit some basics. Or industry are always valued exactly the same way, which is pretty comforting and makes logical sense. Everyone wants to know, basically, after I invest my money in this business, how am I going to get it back? Pretty simple, and just what you would want to do if you were buying something. And so what is determined in the valuation is what is the go-forward cash flow, and by go forward, what happens from the day we close for the next 3 to 5 years at least, and how much cash can I make off of this business. So a couple of things for you to know for terminology, and this is People throw this one out and make it sound complicated. It's really not. It's pretty simple, and all it means is cash flow. But you will hear the word EBITDA, EBITDA, which technically stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. But don't panic, because all that means is cash flow. So when you remove things that are non-cash items, you get back to a cash flow number. What that says logically is if I'm going to figure out how much cash I'm going to make in this business after I close, and I'm going to pay you a 3 multiple, meaning 3 times that annual number, it will take me 3 years to get my money back. So hopefully that makes sense. I think that's the best I can do in this short amount of time. But everyone values exactly the same way. And the bigger, so there are 2 things to pay attention to there. One thing is really maximizing that EBITDA or go forward cash flow number on the valuation. That's again where a business broker that understands this industry can help. It's not just a matter in our industry of removing depreciation and amortization and interest. There are other adjustments that need to be made to maximize that value. And then the second thing is what is the multiple, but honestly the maximized EBITDA can have a bigger impact, and then whatever number it's being multiplied by, of course, or the multiple. I touched on this just a little bit, how real estate is valued in the industry. We have the conversation a lot with people about the most recent appraisal that they got or what the bank said that it's worth. And that's relevant if you're just looking at it from a piece of real estate standpoint. But what has to happen in a purchase and sale, and this is probably the biggest challenge, or I hate to say mistake, but really the biggest mistake I see people make when they buy or sell is in not matching the 2 things correctly. So not matching what they spend on their real estate with what the business is able to produce. So basically they buy more real estate than the business can support. Most of the time when we value 2 ways. So we value real estate, first of all, with how the business can support it. Then second of all, how the real estate, just the raw real estate, if it were any purpose, what would that be worth? And most of the times they're very close because those are successful businesses and people did well when they did it. Sometimes there's a big difference. Sometimes the real estate's in a high growth area and it's now worth more than the education business can afford. Sometimes the business is, exploding and the real estate's in a lower area where it's less valuable without the business that's in it. And so knowing that and knowing how to value it both ways and match that up and getting good advice about what you can get for it, either how much you could lease it for or how much you could sell it for, is important. So again, if that's an interesting topic for you, along with how you might use your real estate for growth, let us know that, because I think that's a complete webinar in itself. So let me run through the things that are important in the transition. The most important thing in the transition is the staff. So if you're on the side of the buyer and you want to be accepted, and you do because you just paid for a business and they're there because they're happy with what's going on in the school, and they're happy with what's going on in the school because of the staff. So your mission in life is to make that staff happy. I see acquirers make announcements about transitions before the close and immediately after. I'm actually okay with either, as long as they can adequately get payroll running and include staff in the process that they do it afterwards. I'm really more of a fan of an announcement a few days before the closing. So what should happen there is the buyer and seller should work together to hold a meeting at closing time, Give them pizza. You know how our people like to eat, and pizza is always popular. Try to spend no more than an hour and hit high spots. So the seller's mission is to say thank you for everything you've done. You've brought us to here. We're trying to bring in a new opportunity for you that will take you here. They'll possibly bring in, so something positive. They'll possibly bring in more resources. They are a bigger company, so more growth opportunities. Find something positive. It's always emotional, but keep it brief and find something positive to say. And then either exit, if that's the best thing, or take a back seat to the acquiring company who immediately says, here's who we are, here's what we believe in, here's nothing will change except your check will come from a new company. Whatever you're doing on Friday, you will do on Monday. And by the way, if you think things need to change drastically, reconsider that acquisition or sale. It won't go well. At least in the short run, it won't. You need to be in there and develop credibility and work with people before you make changes. So know that you can live with whatever's going on in there, at least for a short amount of time. So staff want to know, do I have a job? Is my pay going to change? And what's going to change about my benefits? So hit those things. Give them a chance to ask questions. Leave them feeling at least like this is probably going to be okay, because they're not going to be out the door good before they've texted or posted on social media that there's a transition, and all your parents will know before the letter goes out the next morning. So typically, the next morning, a letter from the buyer and seller, either jointly or separately, go out, and we have some examples of that if that's ever of interest, of things that work well. Go out to the parents making the announcement, and parents will look at the staff and say, is this okay with you? And if the staff say, yeah, I think it's going to be fine, then the parents are fine too. So rarely is there an issue if the staff are made happy and the communication is good and positive. So the most important thing. Once you get past those things, there are a lot of technicalities. Obviously, licensing has to be brought in at a certain point, anywhere between 30 and in California, 90 days in advance. Actually, you have to announce to parents 90 days in advance in California, which is, well, completely different animal. Here's the biggest potential for confidentiality. And I don't know, we've had licensing, somebody doesn't understand this is a confidentiality. I need this piece of paper because we're working through the sale of your school to somebody else. Or they'll just walk in the door and, say something to somebody that they shouldn't. So what I say to people is every time you talk to licensing, remind them that this transaction is confidential. No one knows but me. Only talk to me, and be sure to manage that process really, really tightly. Logistical issues, you should have a laundry list of utility changes, food, all the things that have to happen. Again, get your team involved. There's no way this is a one-man process. Anything administrative or financial, do they need a new computer record keeping system? Do you have payroll ready to go? Is your insurance in place? And then marketing, how you make an announcement about the transition. I get a lot of questions about, do I keep the name? My opinion of that is if there's a good reputation going on and it's a well-respected name, keep it at least for a year. After about 3 to 6 months and parents and staff are comfortable with you, you use the two names simultaneously. For instance, ABC Childcare, a Happy Place company, and eventually change to Happy Place Childcare, so that people get used to hearing the two names together. They feel good about it, and then you can make a transition. There are companies that keep multiple brands. I think it's a challenge for marketing, but that's certainly possible as well, that you would never change the name of that brand. And that is the basis of the transition. Again, so many details in each one of those little topics that we brought up, but hopefully this leaves you a little better to know what questions to ask and to recognize terminology and to at least think about the steps in the process. So we have about 15 minutes. Got some questions. Let's see what we have. I want to grow, say, in my own city where the good locations are not as plentiful, or grow to other cities where there still may be good locations, but I have to get on a plane, question mark. Okay, good question. Get this question a lot. So always, as long as there are still good opportunities within driving range, stay absolutely where you are. There's a big value in clustering. It's much less expensive, easier for you to support. You can share staff, vehicles if a vehicle is down. So as much as you still have great opportunities, stay in your close geographic area. But don't be afraid to go outside of that either. Communication is much easier than it used to be. Once you go outside of a state line, of course, that's a complete new element. You've got a new state licensing process to go through and figure out, and relationships to develop, so that gets more tricky. But I certainly wouldn't be afraid of it. Typically, people can get up to 4 or 5 sites in their immediate market, and then they might consider another small group to grow to 4 or 5 in another market. That's kind of a good size group for clustering. What have you seen that due to the value of the business? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't read it at all. We've seen that it might be better to bring in business-minded people from outside the childcare business instead of promoting from an educator skill set. Oh, okay. I'll answer that in just a minute. A different question. Okay. I think the question is, what have we seen that adds to the value of a business? So, certainly type back in if I'm not understanding the question correctly, but that's a good question anyway. So the things that we say to people are, we work with people, like we said, way in advance, and we really tighten the variable expenses. So we work with them to be sure, and we're never going to underspend, or we're never going to tighten up things that need to be spent. They still need to be healthy expenses, but we don't want waste. So we want to be sure that our expenses are in control. The things that you should do are similar to like you would sell your house. You need to be, well, a fresh coat of paint is really nice. Some landscaping work or mulch adds to the attractiveness. Clean the floors and carpets. What we don't typically recommend is to go out and do very large capital projects unless they're repair projects. Like, you might not want to invest in a huge piece of playground equipment because your acquiring company could very well be moving to a more natural playground experience. You might not want to completely replace your floors, your tile, because maybe your acquiring company prefers laminate wood floors. So a freshness and to keep things, but you should really do that as you go. So to keep your building and your program alive as you go is very important, maximizing value. Are there different multiples of EBITDA for schools in a leased retail center versus a freestanding school? No, not necessarily. So the question here is, what kind of space are you in? Is it at least, I think, was the question about a shopping center? Was that mentioned? Okay. So shopping center spaces can be very nicely done, but are typically less attractive, if we're talking about the larger buyers. Freestanding spaces are more preferred. And what I would say about the type of real estate is it's one of the factors that goes into setting the multiple. So some of those factors are How many sites does the company own? So as the company owns more sites, the multiple goes up. I've seen the range in the past 12 months from 4 to 12, and just know that the 12 was pretty big. So our better range is 4 to 6, depending on, you know, a single site up to 15. So that's usually most people's range, 4 to 6 multiple. So the type of facility and age of facility, whether or not they're subsidy, because less subsidy is more attractive to most people. They consider subsidy to be more risky. They want the curriculum to be very robust. They like accreditation. So there are a lot of factors, and the real estate is one of those. So thank you for that question. For EBITDA, does the tax portion include personal tax, property tax, state, and federal income tax? Okay, really good question. So it depends. So definitely personal tax and income tax are excluded. Those are never included. Whether property tax is included or not depends on what you want going forward. So if you want to lease your property, so if you want to sell your property, obviously that new acquirer will have to pay property taxes, so that number cannot be excluded. If you're going to lease your property, it depends on your expectation going forward. So again, go forward cash flow. If you aren't expecting that new company to pay it, then it shouldn't go in there. If you are expecting them to pay it, or you're going to have to pay it, absolutely it should be in there. So again, you're trying to get to a number that includes your situation going forward. But income tax and personal tax not included. That's the portion you exclude here. Directors who are promoted from teacher positions seem to not understand the business side of the industry. Amen. Most everybody in the industry, it's tough. Only the educational side. Do you see that directors and administrative staff who have a business background be more valuable than selling and purchasing? Not necessarily, really. This is a tough issue in the industry. Most of the people in the industry, owners, directors, come from an educational background and they learn the business side. So to have a strong system in place on the business side and to be able to train people to do what they need to do is very, very important. A lot of times this is where your director, assistant, director mix can be great. Typically you'll have one of the team who's very strong from a relationship and educational standpoint and one who's more of a business manager. So that can work well. As you grow, you can have other people on your team who are business support people. Typically it's more valuable to have strong educators, although again you can't neglect the business side. Is there a good time in the school year to sell? Is summer a good time or worst time, or is any time a good time to sell if the numbers are good? So good question. There are a couple of times a year that people prefer to transition. Obviously right before one of our heavy enrollment times is always good. So right before January 1st, right before May 31st, and typically right before school starts, although there are a few companies who now prefer to see school enrollment before they make the closing, just to be sure that, you know, there are no changes from the school year the year before. But typically right before a transition time is a good time to do it. The only trick with right before January 1st is it's holiday time, and it's hard to get accountants and attorneys, and staff are on vacation and parents are gone. So that can be tricky, maybe the first or second week in January, but those transition times are typically good. Other times, you know, you want to get, most people get the process started right after they get their year-end numbers, and then possibly close before fall. So that's more the norm than anything else, but as long as you have a strong school, or you're looking at a strong school and you want to sell or acquire, there's really no better time than any other time. How long will the process take from beginning to closing? Good question. So in a perfect world, if the world were perfect, you could pull everything off for a business transaction in 60 days and a real estate transaction in 90 days. However, the world is never perfect. So in a more realistic situation, business sale with a lease will take 90 to 120 days, and a business sale with real estate will take 5 to 6 months. And that's on the outside. You know, if you really have your process in place, a lot of it's dependent on licensing, so that can, you know, delay things at times. And again, this is where you might get into holiday issues, because those people seem to go on holiday a good bit more than we do. But so those can delay things. But you know, again, business 3 to 4 months, with real estate 5 to 6. Any other questions? I think I might have. Okay, I actually think I skipped 1 or 2, and I realized I read from the bottom. We are in Texas considering to purchase a Christian faith school, not Christian. Could that be an issue with the parents? Yeah, so really good question there. A culture fit. And I mentioned that, you know, you want to be really sure that you can maintain the culture that that school has immediately after. So I'll give you an example. I have someone who bought a Montessori school, doesn't like Montessori, and immediately wanted to change it to a more traditional school, and of course the school just got wiped out. The parents were there because they liked the Montessori element. So if you're in a Christian school, and I see a range of what's called a Christian school, you can have a Christian school that recognizes Christian holidays and says the blessing. You might have a Christian school that also does Bible stories and teaches Bible, you know, all the way up to it's integrated into almost everything that they do. So some of that might depend on the level of instruction that's given in the school. But if that's an important element of the school and it's perceived by parents as being important, I wouldn't necessarily say that if you personally are not Christian, that would affect people. But if the Christian practices in the school that the director and staff are used to don't continue, that might be an issue. So overall, be sure that the culture that's going on in the school is a culture you can continue at least for you know, some time, and then that kind of culture is difficult to change.
One more question.
And one more. Is the total sale value of the sum of 4 to 6 times the EBITDA of the operating entities, including market rent, the company owned real estate, plus standalone value of the company owned real estate, hard to value? Is the total sale value plus standalone value? Okay, so I think the question does the total value include the effect of what's going to happen with the real estate? Is that how you read that too?
So.
Yeah, so yes, there are several things that would have to change to get to a go-forward EBITDA. So in addition to the elimination of the things we mentioned that about the owner situation that won't go forward. For instance, if you're the owner and you're drawing a salary that's not the director, you're paying for your car, and which are all okay things to do, and your telephone, those get eliminated. So we're pretty aggressive about that. If there's a change in the facility cost because of a change in rent or because a sale of the real estate that will change the buyer's situation in rent, absolutely has to be adjusted. So those are typically the two big adjustments. Any change with owner situation, any change with the cost of the real estate going forward have to be adjusted. Yes, so hopefully I got that question right. So I think we're 1 minute out. Thank you very much for attending. We'd be happy to be a resource. If you didn't get your question answered or not adequately, please shoot it over to me by email. I'm always glad to take your questions that way, and the team would be happy to talk to you about your situation and how we can support you and what you're doing. Take care and enjoy the rest of your summer.